from more than 90 nations, killed on September 11th, 2001 in New York City, Arlington, Virginia, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the 1,000 more who were injured. America and the world commemorate you and your loved ones, the pieces of your soul.
And happy Saturday, and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, September 11th, 2021. You just say September 11th, and a lot of things come to mind. Obviously, people who were sentient beings on 9/11, 2001, who were watching the news early morning on that day, will never forget where they were. There's another thing, though, that's really important to me on 9/11 is my grandbaby's birthday. She's 7 years old. So happy birthday, Aubrey. I know you're not watching, but maybe your parents watch. To let you know, Grandpa says happy birthday. But at any rate, it's 9/11, and obviously we're going to do a lot of talking about that today. Of course, I can't talk about this without having my partner in crime, Val Atkinson. Hey, Val, welcome to The Deal.
Thank you, Ed. Great to be here this morning.
Well, Val, I'm pretty sure I talked to you at some point on that day on 9/11. I'm almost certain I did. It will be a day that, sticks out for, like I said, for the rest of my life, and for people who were old enough to be conscious of what it all meant, or do we know what it all means? And I guess we're going to get to some of that today, right, Val? But let's just start off here and talk about that morning, 9/11, and how you came upon the news and what your first reaction were.
Well, I was home preparing to go to a meeting at the radio station, Radio 1 in Raleigh. And as usual, I'm dressing with the TV on in the background, picking up bits of news. And in this case, I start hearing about it. And then it got my attention. I began to watch it when I saw the second plane plow into the tower there. And I called you, one of the first calls I made. Also called one of my golfing buddies, and we discussed what this meant. And also got a call into the manager at Radio 1 of Raleigh that we both decided to cancel the meeting because it was too much going on. And the meeting was definitely secondary. But I want to go back one step, if I might, Ed, right here, and talk to people who may not have been citizens of the United States 20 years ago, or may not have been born 20 years ago, and maybe asking the question, why is this so critically important? Why are people getting so upset about 9/11? Of course, 2,700 people died, but far more than that die on the streets of America every month or every year. Why 9/11? Well, the reason for it, and people don't talk about it enough for me, is that this was an attack on American soil. And we have to go back to 1812. But there are some others that we don't talk about. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, there were some planes that continued on and bombed the state of Oregon. We don't talk about that very much. When the Germans declared war on the United States of America, the U-2 boats that Germany had, well, we call them submarines or whatever, they snuck up, and a couple of them threw lobs of rockets into New York itself. So this wasn't the first time that America had experienced someone attacking her on her own soil. But it's a big thing because too many Americans think that war is something that's fought on somebody else's land, not on ours. You can't attack us. So if you try to do that, there's a lot of things that's going wrong. First of all, our defense is not as great as we thought it was. Secondly, there's somebody out there with the nerve, with the gall to attack the most powerful country on the planet that the planet has ever seen. What's going to happen next? My whole world is shattered now. I don't know. That is why, and I got this big WHY on my notepad here. That's the why we look at 9/11 as we do. It's not the 2,700 lives. It has to do with the portrait of America as being impenetrable, as being so high up on the list of being protected that nobody should dare strike us. So you need to understand that as you're going through today, watching all the ceremonies, listening to all of the people talk about where they were, who they lost, and why, and the length at which most stations, TV, radio, everybody, internet go through to get their little piece in to say, this is a horrible thing. We really feel strongly about our first responders and so on and so forth. But I just want to add one little caveat in there that on behalf of the 200,000-300,000 people that died in Afghanistan and Iraq that didn't have anything at all to do with 9/11, we need to toll a bell for them too. They had relatives that they left behind. They made people grieve. They were human beings as well. And it's not just about a fireman in Upper Manhattan that lost his life trying to save that of another American. It's great that they did that. We value and honor our first responders, but it's not just about that. And at some other point, I don't know when, Ed, we're going to get into what prompted these 19 guys to do that in the first place.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about that. You're watching the deal or you're listening to it if you're listening to the podcast. We're talking about 9/11. It is 9/11. We happen to be recording and we'll post this on 9/11 and just talking about where we were and what we were doing on that morning. Val, I was on the phone with a friend of mine who's since passed away. And I was talking about a trip that I was making to New York later on in that week. I was going to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire as a contestant. And I was talking to my friend at the time about going in and being on the program. And, obviously everything changed in a matter of, a few minutes. I was not going to New York that week. And I just sat there wrapped, looking at the TV and just trying to process what was going on. One of the things that you did mention, though, Val, is the number of people, the 3,000 or so people that perished. One thing that I didn't find out until just a few hours before we started recording today is that they still haven't identified all the bodies. So if you can hold on just a second, I want to play a clip real quick and then we'll come right back.
In mind, 40% of the victims remain unofficially unidentified.
She was amazing, giving, caring, loving.
Nakia Morgan spoke to her mother on the morning of 9/11. Dorothy Morgan worked for an insurance company in one of the towers. 10 minutes later, the beginning of the end.
I tried calling back and it was just fast, busy signals.
20 years later, Nakia was notified her beloved mother has finally been identified. Thanks to new technology, the DNA in some of the remains matched Dorothy's old toothbrush, making her the 1,646th victim to be positively ID'd.
So, Val, there you go. I did not. I guess not thinking, you would assume they would have identified everybody by now. They just identified this African-American woman who was in the World Trade Center only a few days ago. It's miraculous that, we get fixated on the firefighters and we get fixated on the patriotism and all that. There were families still out there who were not settled. And you rightly bring up the people in Afghanistan and the other places that we went, Iraq, who paid a price too for their families, that and many more loved ones. Not to discount any of the ones that died, but it's miraculous just the number of lives that have been touched. And in over 20 years, imagine, not knowing that your loved one was ever identified until just a few days ago. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing, Ed. And it just goes to show you why we all, as citizens, not just the United States, but citizens of the world, need to stay in touch with what's going on, do our own research and our own uplifting and digging and all those kinds of things. You'd be surprised at some of the stories that are going on out there. So kudos for that. It was a great clip.
Well, let's start to dig into why those planes ended up flying into those buildings. Obviously, the plane that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and by all accounts, the people on that plane took action and brought the plane down because it was apparently headed back to DC, probably to run into the Capitol, maybe into the White House. And that would have been just, I don't even know how to describe what would have happened then. It would have been sheer panic, if that had happened. But let's back up, like you said before, and the 19 people who were involved in this, talk to me about, after these 20 years, how you process how these Saudi people were involved, because the bulk of them were Saudi, and how we handled Saudi Arabia even after this. I mean, I don't feel like they've ever been held to account for, any of the people, because, obviously money came from a lot of sources. Bin Laden wasn't the only one that was supporting these people. Talk to me about Saudi Arabia and their role in this, the whole genesis of the attack.
Well, Dick Cheney, who was vice president of the United States at the time of the attack, came to be the number one strategist and deal maker on the response to 9/11. And Dick Cheney's position was that the Middle East was an ongoing war, and we needed to resolve that for our sake, for the Western world's sake, for Israel, for a lot of reasons. We had almost put our thumbprint on every region of the world except for the Middle East. We had not brought them in tow yet. They were still outside of the Western world's cultural influence. And this was an opportunity, as Cheney and his friends saw it. And so 9/11 became an opportunity to go in and do what they could not do otherwise. That's the reason that you had 19 Saudis that pulled this thing off. And the leader of it all spent a lot of time, if not most of his time, in Pakistan to do these wrongdoings. The rest of the time was in Afghanistan. And we just designed a plan to attack Iraq. Doesn't make sense. But if you take a geographical look at the Middle East, and understand Dick Cheney and his goals, you'll understand why we went into Iraq, why we told lies to get into a war with Iraq. Iraq is in the geographical center of what we call the Middle East. And all of the countries that we don't like, so to speak, border on Iraq in some way, meaning that we are going to have troops on the border now of places like Iran, places like Syria, and have them all throughout Iraq. We can strike out at Libya if we choose to do so. We can assist the Israelis in keeping the Palestinians at bay. There's nothing we can't do if we can get a toehold into Iraq. So that led us into going into Iraq. We had to have a big lie, nothing small would do. And so we came up with the lie that our intelligence agencies had discovered weapons of mass destruction. And when you talk about weapons of mass destruction, possibly being used to bomb places like Chicago and Philadelphia and LA and Miami, you really get scared when you see what just happened in New York. So now you don't have any resistance. Any resistance from the Congress or from Democrats was met with the question, well, do you want another 9/11 on your hand? You know, we've got to do something to stop this. So you had one of my great heroes, Colin Powell, go to the United Nations and be a part of the big lie. He was a unwitting accomplice on this thing because he didn't know they had snookered him as well. And he asked them several times, are you sure the data that I'm about to give to the United Nations is accurate? Because this is a big leap. They said, yes, it is. Go do it. And he did it. And I'm sure he regrets that to this day.
Yeah, I know he regrets it. I mean, I think you can't be someone of his stature and also someone of his. Every time he speaks, he's very considerate about how he speaks about things, and to know that you were used in that manner, it probably weighs heavily on him to this day. Not sure about Condoleezza Rice, but I know Colin Powell probably feels a certain way. You know, Val, one of the things that I want to talk about before we end on this subject, but we got a break coming up, and I hear the music playing. So what I want to do is when we come back, I want to talk about the cost, not just in dollar terms, but the cost in terms of how we've dealt politically and a whole bunch of other things, in terms of lives, money, all that stuff. So, well, everybody stay right there. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some more about 9/11, a whole bunch of other stuff. And we'll be back in just a minute. You're watching The Deal.
Nobody wanted this interview for two reasons. One, it was expensive. And two, they couldn't understand that it was a big deal. Because again, in 1997, 98, no one really knew who Osama bin Laden was in the general public.
And welcome back to our second segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and that's Val Atkinson. It's a somber day for a lot of families who lost loved ones on 9/11, 2001. In New York and in DC and in Pennsylvania. There's not a lot to say about that. Those people will never come back. There's a reason why 9/11 happened. Maybe not a good reason for us. The people who pulled it off think they did it for a noble cause. But isn't that how war works, right? One side thinks that everything they do is right, regardless of how right or wrong it is. Val, we ended up, and I said I wanted to talk about the cost of the war. One of the quotes I heard this week is that Afghanistan alone was over $2 trillion. And then, so that's not counting Iraq. That's not counting any of the activity we did in Syria. That's not counting any of the money we put into the intelligence agencies like the CIA. That's not creating a whole new Department of Homeland Security. We've spent multiple trillions of dollars, and we argue about spending trillions of dollars for our own infrastructure, but we spent all this money in other places. One of the costs that I wanted to talk to you about real quick, and then we can expand this a little bit more. But the first one is this contractor culture that kind of came out of this military action. When you were in the military, Val, I'm pretty sure you had KP duty at some point, and maybe had to peel some potatoes, and maybe you had to wash your own clothes or shine your own shoes. But what happened in Afghanistan was they sent a whole bunch of contractors over to wash people's clothes, to shine their shoes, to prepare their meals who weren't military, to drive trucks. And big corporations like Halliburton and those companies got those contracts. Talk to me a little bit about what happened with all that money and why we never did like we did in World War II, which is send enough troops to get the job done, because everybody was sacrificing in those earlier wars, right? Millions of people went. In the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, sometimes there was only 10,000 people in country that were soldiers, and there were more people in contractors. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you, after World War II was completed, the defense industry found that, this is a new cash cow here. It prompted President Eisenhower to warn the nation about the military industrial complex. He said, that's going to be a problem, guys, watch it. Because there were a lot of companies, organizations out there that made their living, their lifeblood was defense contracts. And they were on the side of any lawmaker who would sign or give a vote or whatever to start a conflict or to continue a conflict, because that meant it was time to spend money on armaments. And oftentimes contractors wanted to start small operations so that the weapon systems that they sold to the United States government 5, 6, 7 years ago could be actually tested in combat. A lot of these things weren't tested. And it didn't matter how they did, because if they did well, it was an excuse to order more. If they didn't do well, it was a reason to go back and modify it, to make it better, to clean up the mistakes. These guys got filthy rich on making things happen. Going back to your opening questions about pulling KP duty and shining shoes and all of that. If you go back prior to World War II, the military, we did everything for ourselves. We were a self-sustaining entity. And now, that we contract things out to companies to do everything from serving food to doing the logistics, driving vehicle trucks, as you mentioned. And all the soldiers got to do is learn his job in terms of what button to push to send what rocket from which drone to kill whomever they've decided to kill. He doesn't have to worry about anything else. So we can save a little money on the number of personnel we need, because these people like Halliburton and the others, they are the ones making all the money. And it bothers me to say, Ed, they don't even pay taxes on it.
Right. Well, that one of the things that I know is, because I know a number of people who went over and did IT or like I said, just drove a truck, and they were making in excess of $100,000 a year, tax-free money. So if you could pay a worker that amount, imagine what the contracting company would get. Because if you know that industry, usually the contract company gets paid as much or more than the person actually doing the work. And so if you multiply that over, like I said, over the 20-year span, we spent multiple trillions of dollars. It probably, like I said, Afghanistan alone, $2+ trillion. And then you add Iraq and Libya and all the other places we went. the figure I saw was close to $5 to $6 trillion. And then when you try to talk about infrastructure here in America, the Republicans get mad and say that you're squandering money. But I think we've squandered $5 to $6 trillion over the last 20 years that could have been going into America and Americans if we weren't intended on winning the war. So I'll just leave it at that. And one final thing on 9/11, we can't cover everything here, and I do want to deal with some other news. But, Val, I went back and looked at some news coverage from the week after 9/11. And one of the things they talked about was how people came together and all the rancor that was in the House and in the Senate seemed to melt away. And then you eventually got to the point where even John Kerry and Hillary Clinton and people like that were voting to allow military action, that kind of thing, in this spirit of bipartisanship that they kept talking about in a lot of the news reports. And someone like George Bush got a lot of support, undeserved in my opinion, because he was letting Dick Cheney and people like that run the whole thing. Let's bring it up to just a few weeks ago when we're pulling out of Afghanistan. The Republicans made a lot of hay about pulling out of Afghanistan, and they were not trying to be bipartisan at all after the 13 service members were killed at the airport in Kabul. It sort of points out the hypocrisy. It's sort of a loaded question, Val, because we know the answer, but have we not learned anything politically that the Republicans are never going to deal with this whole notion of fighting terrorism and any of this fairly, that they'll always use it as some sort of cudgel against the Democrats, and Democrats often walk into that trap over and over again?
They keep walking into that trap, Ed, because Republicans right now are only interested in one thing, that is retaining and gaining power by whatever means necessary. And Democrats are going to have to start playing that same game, or at least understand that the game is being played, to come up with an appropriate defense against that, because it's ridiculous to play 1970s defense against a 21st century offense. It won't work. It just won't work in any sport. It doesn't work in politics. It doesn't work anywhere. So the Democrats are going to have to up their game, as we say. They're going to have to start understanding the real purpose and meaning behind the Republicans' move to make war, to get out of war, to do all of these things. They have ulterior motives. And it all goes back to two things, Ed, like we say all the time. Goes back to November of 2008 when Barack Obama became the president-elect. And it goes back to the census of 2010 when the demographer said that by the year as early as 2042, whites would no longer be the majority in this country. You put those two things together, it scared the bejesus out of a whole bunch of right-wing white people in this country. And that was the impetus for the strategies and the actions that gave us the type of polity that we find ourselves in right now in America.
Val, there's so much more we could talk about in terms of 9/11 and the politics of 9/11 and how people have used it, and how people continue to use politics in general to try to maintain and retain power. And one of those, this is going to be a real gear shift here. We're going all the way to fifth gear here. Is with the state of Texas and our dear friend Governor Abbott. And I want to switch gears to that real quick, because I think it's clear. It's a clear indication of what you talk about how they think that they can play these political games to retain power and be so cynical. We talked a little bit last week about the Texas legislation that essentially turns your neighbors into bounty hunters. and will let them try to track down people who are seeking abortion or have gotten help to maybe get an abortion after the 6 week, which is too early because you don't even know you're pregnant most of the time. I got a clip real quick, Val. Let's look at that and then we'll talk about it on the other side. So this is Merrick Garland talking about the lawsuit against the state of Texas.
Right.
So, Val, that's the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, announcing a lawsuit against the state of Texas. Again, I do what other people don't do. I read the lawsuit, and in it, they come right out. Justice Department says Texas is cynical, and they know that this is unconstitutional. It raises a lot of questions. One, because we already know that the Supreme Court kind of whiffed on it, right? And they had a chance to deal with it and didn't do anything about it. I don't know what that's about, but we can talk about that a little bit later. So with the Justice Department suing the state of Texas, will this force it to the Supreme Court, one? And two, what do you think Texas's real motivation for this? They put a law on the books that they don't enforce, that they turn into some sort of civil action so your neighbors can turn against your neighbors, which is a very slippery slope because you could turn around and do it to them on guns or whatever else, or belonging to an organization or whatever. What do you make of what Texas was trying to do? And then two, what Merrick Garland says about this lawsuit and why they feel like they need to sue the state of Texas? Will that get it to the Supreme Court?
Well, ultimately, they want as much as they can get to go in front of the Supreme Court because of the 6-3 conservative majority that the Republican Party has at this time. But that may not be the initial impetus here. I believe that the idea, the novelty of the idea was so fresh and hit so hard that there were lots of people who said, you know, that's a great idea. Hadn't thought of that before. So let's give it a shot. Are you sure that this is beyond the court's purview? And if so, let's find out. And teams of lawyers would examine it and says, I don't see why it can't work. And when it got going, they saw this as something that their constituency, their base would like. And this is another layer of protection against being primaried if you have to run for office, whether it's governor or in the state legislature. You don't want anybody to get around your right flank if you're a Republican. So these are sort of guideposts along the way to say that, look how far right and stupid I am. You know, I dare anybody to get around further right than me. So these are things that, and I'm saddened to say that it may be just the beginning of craziness coming out of these far right legislatures and governor's mansions and other places, even the US Congress. And thank goodness for right now, they don't have a majority, because if they had a majority right now, I hate to think where we would be in this country in terms of the laws. If Donald Trump were president and both houses were run by Republicans, I don't know where we'd be as a country. It would be catastrophic to even think of. So I'm not sure where we go with this, whether or not we go to the Supreme Court. I hope we do, because I want to get the Supreme Court on record as to having said that, yeah, you can do this and standing doesn't matter. And the 14th Amendment about equal protection doesn't matter. And nothing else matters if you're a Republican. I want to get Ms. Barrett and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on record as going that way. So that when we do things, as you said, about bringing up gun issues and things of that nature, we can remind them of the precedents that they've set. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah. Well, it brings up, you got us right to the Supreme Court, which is where I wanted to go next. I got it right here on my pad. I wanted to talk about the Supreme Court in relation to that. We talked a little bit last week with our buddy, Professor Irv Joyner on Connections on the radio program about whether or not the court gets expanded or they do, it's not constitutional that you have 9 members on the court. It could be 12, it could be 13, it could be 85 if you wanted to go extreme, because it's been as little as 5 before. Where does this get us on that whole conversation? Does that advance any at all, particularly if it goes to that court and you get it doesn't look like you're going to get a 6-3. I think Roberts has tipped his hand again that he's not willing to go as far as the Republicans want him to go. But the other folks, the other 5 are clearly okay with going as extreme as possible. A Clarence Thomas, a Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, they seem to be okay with it. So this court expansion, does that come back up at all, or are the Democrats still not confident that they, 1, could get it done, and 2, are they willing to go that far? Because former Justice Breyer said that he thinks that maybe it's a bad idea because what goes around comes around.
Well, if you're going to keep worrying about what they're going to do to you if you do unto them, you'll never get anything done. You'll never correct any problems. You'll never do anything for your people because of fear. You can't have that. It's like a boxer going in the ring and say, I could jab this guy with my left hand to keep him off of me, but he may get mad because I hit him in the face. He may hit me back. Well, hey, you don't need to be a boxer. You need to get out of that business, because that's what he's there for, to hit you back. His job is to hit you and keep you from hitting him. But getting back to this end of it here, I'm not sure if we have the right people in place, Ed, to expand the court at this time. I'm not sure if we have people in the Congress talking about both houses. I'm not sure if we have the right people at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to make things happen, to say we need an expansion of the courts. I think you have some protectors in both places, the Congress and in the executive branch of government, that want to protect the known government. They're still in the 60s and the 70s in their mind. They want to protect that and keep it as it is. They don't want to upset the apple cart because they're afraid if they jab somebody may get mad and hit them back. So they don't want to do anything but play defense the whole while. And maybe the guy will go away. But I think it's needed. I think without that, you have allowed them to have the next generation or two live under right-wing draconian legal measures when there is no need for that. They got this advantage, in my words, Ed, illegally, by denying Barack Obama the opportunity to appoint a Supreme Court justice. And then they turn around and appoint Barrett 180 degrees from the reason that they denied Merrick Garland his job, his post. So you can see there's no need in trying to come up with logic and fairness and all of this stuff to deal with these guys. You got to come up with a strategy that wins. Don't worry about them hitting you back. Just get the job done. And if you got people saying, well, we better not hit them because they may hit us back when they get a chance, he's the wrong guy for the job.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. We ended up exactly where I wanted to end up on this, to talk about the court and whether or not it's going to expand. So we're hitting all the marks today, folks. I hear the music in the background, so that means we need to take another break. When we come back, Val, I want to start with COVID and we'll try to get as many other things covered in the final segment of the deal. You're watching The Deal. We'll be back in just a minute.
Yeah, because I have a granddaughter who's a year old and she has Down syndrome and she's had heart surgery, and I wanted to protect her. I wanted to protect her and myself. So, and my godmother, she had been on me to get my shot, and I finally decided it was time, and to stop putting it off and come and get it done. And I'm glad I did.
We're playing for real here. This isn't a game.
The new requirements could apply to nearly 2/3 of the American workforce. It's President Biden's strongest push yet to require vaccines.
All businesses with 100 or more employees must ensure their workers are either vaccinated or tested once a week. Companies could face thousands of dollars in fines if they don't comply.
And welcome back to our final segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, 9/11, 2021. 20 years since two planes struck the World Trade Center and ultimately took them down in New York. And a plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And then another plane hit the Pentagon. Val, I saw some footage I had never seen before at the Pentagon. And it was part of a documentary on Smithsonian Channel. And they were talking to a lot of the people who were in a meeting who had to crawl their way out of the Pentagon. And again, this is something you don't know because you just don't know, but there were so many Black folks who were killed at the Pentagon, both military and folks, civilians who worked there, secretaries and just people going about their business, some retired military people who came back as contractors or whatever, and a lot of African-American people. And they interviewed them, and their voices I've never heard on any of these interviews. They typically go and interview Rudy Giuliani or, a firefighter that was in New York. It was just interesting to me. We've talked a lot about 9/11 today, and I promised we were going to talk about some other stuff, but that just struck me that it seems like we don't tell full stories, right? That's one of the problems with American media. News cycle so quick, you don't get full stories. And if you get a chance, get over to the Smithsonian Channel, if you have it. And they have a lot of good documentaries on 9/11, and they have a lot of footage and a lot of things that you probably never seen. So Val, I said I wanted to talk about COVID real quick. Joe Biden issued a mandate for vaccines for federal employees. He's also saying that, okay, states, you got to do better. So now he's in a back and forth with the usual suspects like DeSantis and Abbott and those clowns. Hold on real quick. Let's look at Governor DeSantis real quick.
When you have a president like Biden issuing unconstitutional edicts against the American people, we have a responsibility to stand up for the Constitution and to fight back, and we are doing that in the state of Florida. This order would result potentially in millions of Americans losing their jobs. I think we should be protecting people's jobs, not trying to kick people out of work right now, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing in Florida.
Okay, Val. The governor of Florida, he's killing a whole bunch of people. I'll go out on a limb. I don't have anything to lose. He is killing people. He's trying to convince people that it's a bad idea to wear a mask. He's iffy on vaccines. Now he's mad at Joe Biden about vaccine mandates or whatever. Can we get rid of him? Of DeSantis, or are we stuck with this guy?
Well, I don't know when he is scheduled for re-election, but the good thing about it is the gerrymandering won't help him. So he's got to convince enough crazy Floridians to vote for him regardless. And as my old pharmacist used to tell me, in politics, the people normally get the type of leadership they deserve. So if they want to go in and vote for this guy when they don't have to, then they deserve to have to live with him for 4 more years. So I don't know what needs to happen, but it's going to happen here pretty soon. He's sick. I don't know, because the very people that he's trying to get to not wear masks, to not take vaccinations and those kind of things are the people that will probably vote for him in an election, statewide election that's coming up. And he's putting them in situations where they're going to be hospitalized, if not funeralized, by the time the next election comes up. And that's crazy. You're killing your own constituency.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I don't know who's going to vote for you if they're dead. But of course, the Republicans keep claiming that dead people vote. So I don't know. Maybe they're on to something that I'm overlooking. But on a serious note, Val, if I see another one of these videos of somebody in the hospital saying they're regretful about not taking the vaccine, that they bought into it hook, line and sinker. I saw one that really moved me, and I'm not going to play it yet because I'm sure people are tired of it, but I'll just talk about it. There's this woman, she's in the hospital bed, she's clearly in distress, and she was famous, I guess, on Instagram and TikTok for giving out recipes or something. She had a big following. Regardless, she's laying there, and it's another one of these videos where she says, well, I just wanted to wait and see what was. Well, she waited to see what would happen. And what happens is you die. And I'm still struggling, Val, with have I lost my empathy, sympathy, or both for people who will kill themselves, but they also kill other people? Because the other story that I saw was a woman who had a 4-year-old child, who's the first pediatric case in Galveston County of a child under 12 dying from COVID. The whole family has COVID. And the mother says that she attended rallies and she believed and bought into it. And now that her daughter is dead, she wants people to take the vaccine, and she's regretful for not doing it. I guess the long way around it, Val, is, am I bad for starting to lose my sympathy, empathy for some of these folks?
No, that's just, as the old folks said, that's how you were raised, Ed. So you can't get rid of that, which is a good thing. But I don't know if there's room out there for people to come around and understand that they have been fooled. Maybe let's hope that Mark Twain got it wrong when he said it's easier to fool somebody than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. So let's try to keep convincing these people that they have been fooled by the likes of Abbott and DeSantis and all of the rest of the old Trumpers and that kind of thing. Let's hope, because they, in fact, really have an impact on us, people who've been vaccinated, people who wear masks and practice social distancing and all the rest of the stuff. They have an impact on us because they could get us in a bad way. I just don't know if Biden is strong enough. He may have to threaten some of these people, Ed. He may have to say, well, I'm not going to let you and your own prescribed sort of individualism kill my whole country. I'm not going to let you do that because you're spreading the virus. And before I let you do that, I'll declare martial law and lock all of you up so you can't do anything bad. And that's an extreme. And of course, I jest when I say that because I'm not serious. But he is going to have to do something to show them that there is something worse than taking the vaccine or wearing a mask. And that something worse is death. And if you don't care whether you die or not, if you want to die anyway so you can go to heaven, as they call it, that's up to you. But you infecting scores of other people or maybe even hundreds of other people before you die. Now that's my business. You know, it may be your business to wear a mask or not, or get the vaccine. But when you get other people hurt and put them in harm's way, that's our business. And we're not going to let you do it. So I think the president was dead on, spot on, when he said, okay, this is what's going to happen. If you got over X amount of employees out there, even in the private sector, you got to have them vaccinated, or you got to test them. If you work for the government, everybody's got to be vaccinated, which includes the military, or you got to be tested. I mean, this is the way it is, and there's no exception, guys. And you can cry my rights and these other things as long as you want, but this is the way it's going to work.
Yeah, well, you know, Val, we got rid of polio through vaccinations. And I bet you, if you're old enough, if you look on one of your arms, you still got a scar from one of those shots that we got when we had to stand in line in school, or else you couldn't get in school to get either rubella or measles or whatever. And the whole notion that some sort of vaccine mandate is an anathema to freedom.
Yeah.
Is but sheer bananas to me. I think I mentioned it on the radio program last week that I stumbled across a pamphlet that Benjamin Franklin had written. I got the date wrong when we talked about it on the show. I said in the 1790s. Actually, it was in the 1750s when he wrote this. He said that public health was people's responsibility. You should not make other people sick. If you got a way to stop from making other people sick, you should not do it.
Right.
We've been knowing about this for 250 years, Val, and for somebody to try to say this is a rights issue is beyond me. But let's move on before we run out of time. Guess what? I'm gonna show you some video right here, and I think you're gonna like it. This is from Richmond, Virginia.
Hey, look, that nigga, look, he like, so we need again. Our streets! Our streets! Our streets! Our streets! Our streets!
So, Val.
Yes.
You've been to Richmond a lot of times.
Yeah.
I've been to Richmond a lot of times. The Lee statue is gone.
About time.
Did you ever think in your lifetime that you would see the Robert E. Lee statue gone from Richmond, Virginia?
Never, ever in my lifetime did I think it would be gone. And I text one of my childhood friends. His partner down there is the president pro tem of the legislature in Virginia. Our high school mate, Louise Lucas. And I text both of them and said, congratulations, guys, you did it. And you made these kind of things happen. But it's something that we don't expect because of what Richmond meant to the Confederacy, being the capital, what Robert E. Lee meant to the Confederacy, being the commander-in-chief of all of the armed forces. And then what people like Jeff Davis and Stonewall Jackson and Alexander Stephens and all of those guys, Calhoun, it all comes back to Richmond. Even though South Carolina was the first state to secede and Virginia was not among the first 7 that seceded to make up the Confederacy. It still always came back to Virginia. So to have them to get on board and say, yeah, it's time, Robert E. Lee, for you to go. It spoke volumes.
Well, you know, what I got to say about it is losers, losers, losers. That's what happens to losers. You get swept into the dustbin of history. But you're a history guy. You go to Civil War sites. I do too. The Civil War has never finished here in America. We're still in a divided country. And when people say we've never been more divided or less divided during this period or that period or whatever, I don't think you can be any more divided than a civil war where people are killing each other and you kill almost 700,000 people. So I do acknowledge that we have advanced ourselves to a point, Val, where I can sit here and talk openly about this. We can see the statues removed. We can live pretty much where we want to and move about like we want to. At the same time, there still needs to be a George Floyd Justice Act. There still needs to be a John Lewis Voting Rights Act and all that. So let's put the removal of the statue in context, right? We had one here in North Carolina in downtown Raleigh, like a lot of places, statue has been removed. Now it's removed in Charlottesville. Now it's removed in Richmond. Now they're being removed. The flag's been taken down in South Carolina. Mississippi changed their flag.
Yes.
Which so all those things have happened, Val. And we do live in a world where you see more biracial kids in couples. Removing those symbols and all those things still doesn't mean we're done, does it? So give me where we are in context. The flags are gone. Some of the statues are gone. Fort Bragg will probably eventually get renamed and so on and so forth. But should I be happy with that? Or what is the other step that needs to happen?
Well, one of the sayings right after the Civil War uttered by Democrats at that time, because they were the conservatives. He said, your amendments may make it illegal to do this, that, or the other, because you've changed the law. But none of the laws that you've changed has any effect on my consciousness, my heart, and my soul. And what was meant by all of that was that you can write all the laws you want, but you can't change my mind or my heart in terms of the way I feel about my fellow man. And if I think he is less than me because he's not the same color that I am, if I think I was put here on this earth to rule him and others because of the color of my skin, that's the way I'm gonna think and feel to the day I die. And then no law is gonna change that. So I think we need people of color and white people of goodwill need to keep that in mind, that we're not so stupid to think that we can pass a law and change the hearts of people that wish us ill will. You can't do that. We're just trying to make it so that they can become accountable for what they do. Yeah. They can be held accountable for what they cause to happen. And if we can do that, then maybe we can live not free of your hatred, but free of the actions that your hatred would cause. And if you come around one day, fine. If you don't, that's your business, as long as it's not impacting me. You can stay in your little silo and be as hateful as you want, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else.
Yeah,
we need to stop trying to change minds and hearts and change the law.
Yep. And also just take some action, Val, when we have the opportunity, when the Democrats or whoever the progressives are at the time have an opportunity to do something, do it. Don't think about
this do it.
Spirit of bipartisanship BS that I'm
here.
Right. Anyway, well, we have covered a whole bunch of ground today, Val. But before we leave, like I always do, I need to ask you what's coming up in the coming week, or what we got to look forward to. What can you tell me?
Well, Connections on Foxy 107, 104. And you can go to Radio 1 or Urban 1, and you can figure out how to get to those stations to listen to us. Our sister public affairs program is a program called Talkback, and we alternate weeks. So if we're not on Talkback's on, when they're not on, we're on. But if you lock in that station from Radio 1, Foxy 107, 104, you'll be able to hear Ed Clark and myself and Herb Jonah on Connections every other week. And we cover items and actions of the day, not only in North Carolina, but worldwide. So tune us in. Yeah. There's even an opportunity for you to send in messages via text or email to ask questions or make statements, and we can read it on the air.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, there you go. There's some music, Val, that we hear it again. We have again squandered a whole hour of your time, but we appreciate you coming in and being with me and Val. And we'll be having guests in the coming weeks, like we do from time to time. I talked to Dr. McFarland, so she's back in country. She's no longer in Jamaica, so she may be back in here, and Dr. Harris and all the other gang that we have on. So in the meantime, go do something good for somebody today, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
We're cold, we're cold, we're cold, we're cold, we're cold.
To the families of the 2,977 people from more than 90